Hi, here's something you might not know, that your emotions aren't the truth. They're your brain's best guess across cultures. We all know this is true, except it isn't. We all know the brain works like this. There's a rational thinking layer on top, and underneath it sits an older, more emotional layer. And when we're stressed, the primitive part takes over. You might have heard this as the triune brain idea. A lizard brain for survival, a limbic brain for emotion, and a neocortex for reason, stacked like layers, competing for control. It's a neat explanation. It's also an outdated and scientifically rejected one. And if you are an international professional or their partner, navigating a new country, a new language, and a new version of yourself, this matters. Because when you assume your emotions are truth, proof that something is wrong, unsafe, or hopeful, then you can end up building your decisions around a false certainty. So what if instead emotions are better understood as your brain's best guess in the moment? Not random, not meaningless, not just in your head, but also not a verdict. Here's the core idea, that emotions are information, not a judgment. So here's a reframe I want to offer. An emotion is not a fact about the world, it's a meaning your brain is constructing. It isn't just a philosophical take. Over the last couple of decades, many neuroscientists and psychologists have been challenging the old emotion circuit story. The idea that your brain contains hardwired universal emotion buttons that simply get pressed. One influential perspective associated with neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett and other researchers working in what's sometimes called the constructivist view of emotion is that your brain is constantly predicting and categorizing what's happening, including what you're feeling, using, for example, signals from your body, your heart rate, your breathing, tension, a sense of fatigue, your past experiences, the concepts and language you've learned, often through culture, and the context you're in right now. In plain terms, your brain is not only reacting to the world, it's interpreting it. That interpretation can feel like certainty, but it's still an interpretation. And when you live across cultures, the context part becomes a moving target. The same bodily sensations can be interpreted differently depending on the culture you grew up in, the culture you're living in now, the language you're using day to day, and even the workplace norms around emotion, authority, directness, and belonging. So yes, your emotions matter. They are meaningful, but they are not automatically the truth. So let's talk about three myths we're still acting as if they were true. Myth number one is that there is a rational brain and an emotional brain, and they fight for control. This is the classic head versus heart story. It shows up in leadership advice, productivity culture, and even well-meaning coaching. A popular version of this is the triune brain idea I mentioned before. The lizard brain, the primitive survival, the limbic system about emotions, and the neocortex, where reason sits. The implication is that when you're stressed, the lower layers hijack the higher ones. The issue is that the brain doesn't really work like a stack of separate brains battling it out. Emotion and cognition are deeply intertwined. Your brain is not just switching between thinking mode and feeling mode like a toggle. Why this matters abroad? Well, if you believe your emotions are a primitive takeover, you might treat them as a problem to suppress. But suppression often increases stress and reduces clarity. So a more useful question is, what is my brain trying to predict right now? And what data is it using? Myth number two is about, well, if I feel it strongly, it must be true. This one is subtle. It sounds like self-trust, but it can become a trap. If you feel anxious before a meeting in your new job, Your brain might be interpreting bodily sensations like tight chest, elevated heart rate as danger. But that does not automatically mean the meeting is dangerous or that you're not capable. Strong emotion is real, but it's also not proof. And why does this matter when you're living abroad? Well, when you're in a new culture, your brain has fewer familiar cues. That uncertainty can amplify intensity. You may experience things like, I don't belong here, I'm failing, they don't like me. Sometimes those thoughts point to something important, but sometimes they're your brain just trying to create certainty in an ambiguous environment. And myth number 3 is that emotions happen to me, and therefore I either control them or I don't. This myth creates 2 unhelpful options. So either you're in control, which is presumed to be good, or you're out of control, which is like, oh, bad, bad. But if emotions are constructed, then agency looks different. It's not about forcing yourself to feel something else on command. It's about shaping the ingredients your brain uses to make meaning. And that can include, well, sleep, food, movement, and just recovery. I mean, your body signals are part of the input. But it can also include the stories you tell yourself about what the situation means, or the emotional concepts you have available, your vocabulary and the nuance you can use. It can also be about culture-specific norms that you've internalized about what is acceptable to feel. This matters abroad because you may be living between emotional rule books. In one culture, directness is care. In another, it's aggression. In one culture, calmness is competence. In another, enthusiasm is. So your brain is trying to predict the social meaning of everything, often at high speed. So here's something about the cultural layer and why moving countries can change your emotional life. If you've ever thought, I wasn't like this before I moved, well, you're not alone. Living abroad can shift many things. Your social status and sense of competence, especially when the language changes. Your access to micro support, like familiar friendships, family, easy community. Your daily cues of safety and belonging. And even your identity, who you are when no one knows your backstory. In that landscape, your brain is doing a lot of predictions with less reliable information. So it makes sense that emotions can feel louder, sharper, or even more confusing. And it also explains why 2 people can have the same expat experience and feel completely different things. Because their brains are constructing meaning from different histories, different concepts, and cultural learning. So here's my personal note this time. In my previous chief executive role, I received a surprising number of gifts from representatives of our member organizations spread around the world. And at first, I filed them under one simple category. It's a kind gesture. But over time, I realized the gift itself wasn't the point. The meaning was, and meaning is cultural. So for some visitors, for example, many Latin American and Asian cultures, bringing a small gift was almost automatic. It often carried warmth and respect. It meant, I'm grateful for your time. I'm honored to be here, or just saying, I didn't come empty-handed. When that's the script you know, a gift can feel like connection. For others, for example, many Germans, gifts simply weren't part of the professional script. They would arrive with strong preparation, clear agenda, and direct communication. But no wrap token at the end. Not because they were careless, but because care was expressed differently. And then there was the organizational layer about integrity. In that role, we had to declare gifts about a certain value, certain set threshold. I can't remember exactly what. I think it was around 20 euros or something. Now, the policy wasn't there to shame generosity. It was there to protect trust. What I find so revealing looking back is the emotional whiplash that can happen when different rule books meet. If you grew up with gifts as a sign of respect, no gift can feel like, ooh, cold, dismissive, or even rejecting. On the other hand, if you grew up with strict boundaries around gifts, a gift can feel very uncomfortable, even like an attempt to influence or a bribe. So the object doesn't constrain the truth. The emotion that arises is your brain's best guess, built upon your past experiences and the cultural context you're using to interpret that moment. So if you ever catch yourself reacting strongly to a small workplace moment abroad, whether it's a gift, a thank you, a silence, or a direct question, try this pause. Ask yourself, what is my brain predicting right now? Which cultural rule am I applying? What else could be true? And what would a respectful next step look like here? You don't have to stop feeling, but you can create a little space between the feeling and the conclusion. So here's a practical way to work with emotions without dismissing them. If emotions are your brain's best guess, the goal isn't to argue with them. The goal is to get more precise. Try this 3-step check-in. 1. Name the sensation, your body first. I don't know, my chest is tight, or my stomach is heavy, or my jaw is clenched. 2. Name the emotion, but hold it lightly. This might be anxiety. This could be disappointment. Or, I think this feels like shame. And then 3. Name the context and offer 2 alternative meanings. I'm in a new culture, new team, new language. So one meaning is I'm not safe. Another meaning could be maybe, hey, I'm uncertain and my brain wants predictability. This is not positive thinking, it's expanding your options. Over time, this practice helps you build what researchers sometimes call emotional granularity. That is the ability to make finer distinctions than just good or bad or stressed or fine. And finer directions tend to create better choices. Where beliefs quietly shape emotions, there's one more layer here that deserves its own space: beliefs. Because what you believe about yourself, whether it's I'm behind, about others, oh, they're judging me, or about the world, it's not safe to make mistakes here, becomes part of the predictions your brain makes. In my next feature article, so watch out for it, I want to explore that more directly. That is, how beliefs become invisible defaults and how to work with them without self-blame. The takeaway for this time? Well, your emotions are real and they deserve respect, but they are not always truth. They are often your brain constructing meaning from body signals, past experiences, and cultural context. When you learn to pause and ask, what is my brain predicting right now? You create space. And in that space, you can choose a response that reflects who you want to be, not just what your nervous system is guessing. So here's a gentle invitation. If you're living abroad and noticing that your emotional life feels different than it used to be, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me, what emotion has been most confusing or persistent for you lately? And what do you think your brain might be trying to protect you from? Share your reflections in the comments or email me about it, whatever feels better. And for further support, know that you can always book a discovery call with me. So how do you feel right now? See you next time.